Hi everybody. My name is Josh Astbury. I'm also a Josh, so taking over from a Josh this morning. Thank you for the amazing talk, Josh Sawyer. I am not going to be as good as that Josh, so I hope you're all okay because the. Thank you. Do you want to take over? Fair enough. Yes, so I'm Josh Astbury. I'm a video game producer and designer. To seal Josh Sawyer's references as well, I'm taking the hobbits to Isengard in New Zealand right now and having a lovely time of it. But I'm here with Scott Reismanis of Mod.io ModDB. Good morning, Scott.
Yeah, good morning. Great to be here.
Anything about you? Do you want to?
Yeah, well, I'm founder of Mod.io and ModDB. 20-year history in video games, pretty much always centered around helping studios establish communities of players. I found my passion when playing Counter-Strike and a whole bunch of mods for Half-Life and Warcraft and Command & Conquer and those sorts of games in the early days, and there was no real destination to find it, so I thought, well, why don't I create a ModDB, because there's the Internet Movie Database. Well, how hard can it be? And that sort of sparked and led to a lot more things, and yeah, I'm glad to be talking about that topic today with you, Josh.
Oh, thank you. Just to preface, I've been losing my voice for the last 2 days, so if it just gives out during this talk, it's just over to you, okay?
Not a problem.
Right. Before we dive into UGC and mods, just a bit of terminology clarity. What is the difference, if there is a difference, between user-generated content and mods?
Yeah, so this one's one that pains me, actually, because UGC is just sort of like that all-encompassing term, and it's kind of like a softer way of describing mods, because one of our earliest ambitions at Mod.io was to help with cross-platform mod support, and a mod to a console company like PlayStation or whatever potentially is a mod of the console, so it's a little bit of a negative terminology, whereas a mod to a PC gamer is, this is an amazing piece of content. And so we use the UGC vernacular to sort of, I guess, soften those conversations. Now those platforms are starting to use the modding vernacular back to us, which is great, because I think modding is like the word that games use, and it's a really positive connotation. It's what players seek within titles. So user-generated content and UGC, it's more just the all-encompassing work. It's more simplistic content where modding can be external assets, more ambition, and everything else.
So it's not just the hardware in this case. It's taking the word mod and attaching it to digital content versus modifying the hardware, software.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So. Great. So diving into the talk overall, the blurb had so much to get through. I don't think we're going to have time today to get through everything else, but we'll give it a shot. Looking at the state of modding, user-generated content as a whole today, coming from the late 90s, the early 2000s, my childhood was spent on PC. When you wanted to install a mod, it went to some sketchy website, not ModDB, don't worry, and downloading a file, extracting it, finding some weird directory on your C drive, maybe it's a hidden folder, possibly editing some text file or DLL file to get this thing to work, all in the hopes it doesn't destroy your save and you have to reinstall everything. That's what at least I grew up with when it came to using mods and implementing mods, primarily a PC-only experience. And then 2011 happened. Valve launched Steam Workshop, made it a lot more accessible for people to use and integrate mods, but it still required work from the devs, and it still was PC-only. 2025, you've mentioned other platforms, so I'm assuming then that is no longer the state of the industry today.
I mean, I think the first thing that you said there actually is really important, because despite the fact that modding was so hard in the early days and you had to unzip a file and override and like could crash your game and impact saves, it was still insanely popular. So I think that immediately just speaks to the benefit and power of modding in a title. But yes, these days it's much more modernized. I think there's still a long way to go in terms of having the engines, Unity and Unreal, in particular, support the moddability of the games that are created in those ecosystems a lot better than they currently do. We've come a long way now where studios actually are realizing that the time invested in the moddability of their title and pursuing that cross-platform support and everything requires us getting away from the sort of the hacky beginnings that it started with, and having a way in which that content can load in a very compliant, safe, multiplayer manner that's friendly and accessible for the user. And digital distribution is beautiful for that, because it means you don't have to visit an external website. It can be official, it can be hosted in the game, and right there for the consumer, and that opens up a ton of commercial possibilities.
Is that primarily how studios developers are supporting UGC or mods today, with basically internal, within-game support tools, or is it still like additional SDKs you have to download and utilize like back in the day?
You're talking about the creation or the consumption?
Well, the creation, just general like acceptance from studios themselves and developers. What is the support network there that is today that wasn't in the past?
So the creation still very much is PC only. Usually it's using editors that are external to the game. It's rare that an in-game tool exists, and it's not necessary actually. A lot of studios talk to us and can we make creation more accessible and open to more players? And we actually look at some of the more popular games that we work with, like SnowRunner and Baldur's Gate 3, and they've got tens of millions of players across their title, but creation is only like a fraction of 1% of that audience is actually making content, because the tooling does require a game development background and things, but that doesn't hinder, like that dynamic range and the complexity is almost what motivates those creators to make something amazing. That barrier to entry almost like serves as a validation checkpoint. So the tooling has evolved and it's getting better, and we're currently like working with some of those engine providers to continue to take steps in this direction. But for the most part, it's the studios that direct that, because every game is slightly different, and the needs and the types of content and what's going to resonate and what's going to engage players and create opportunity does differ title by title. And there's not quite a one-size-fits-all solution at the moment. So
there's not, in general, like a one reason why studios are adopting UGC practices or support in this case?
Well, I think there's not one reason, but I think there's a million reasons, and that is the whole thesis for, I guess, why we started mod.io, and that was, if you look at the last 20 years of gaming, the franchises that are still relevant and really powerful today tend to have a modding element to them. So we go back to when Skyrim came out, and that's been such an influential game over the last decade. All of the Valve titles that have been so influential, half of the genres, like the survivalist genre, emerged from DayZ. The battle royale genre, emerged from sort of Arma and the battle royale mod. The Dota, like the MOBAs and all that. All of these ideas emerged from modders. So. The studio's motivation for doing it is simple, and that is content production is expensive, it's complex. Studios, especially when you're meeting payroll, you can only take the bets that you know are going to win, whereas your creators, if you can enable them, they outnumber you 100 to 1, that player base, and if you can unlock their creativity, they're going to explore a lot of the fringes of what you would like to explore but can't necessarily do, and occasionally through that process, they're going to create something incredible, and then that naturally is a very strong way of growth. And so studios that are looking at modding today are very much focused on, all right, it's such a competitive market for player attention and everything. How can we differentiate and stand out and work with our users that want to have that creative element, not just the consumption element? And that's where I think modding really shines.
Okay, so it's really amazing that you're pointing out very key elements that studios are really enjoying having this content created by their active and engaged communities, even if it is a small percentage that are the actual creation part. Why, on the flip side of that, do studios hesitate? Why do developers and studios hesitate to implement support for user-generated content? Is there a chief reason, or is it, again, a multifaceted problem?
Well, there's as many reasons for, there's as many reasons against, and it's, I guess, our role to try to eliminate these. One, modding is unpredictability, and so that unpredictability is what leads to those amazing creations that completely change the status quo. But particularly the larger studios that we're working with, unpredictability is not necessarily seen as a good thing. They've got a really robust healthy business. They have very clear IP partnerships and sort of a vision for what their game is. When you introduce mods into that, your players might see it very differently. Now, I would argue that's a good thing because that freedom of expression of your users is going to allow them to personalize that gameplay play experience and expand upon the world that you've created and apply their own imagination to it in good ways. But that gives pause to those studios because they're worried about inappropriate content or the stability of that content and the influence it might have. How does it conflict with their pre-existing business model? Like we kind of went for the controversial topic just to be a little cheeky with the title of this presentation today. But is UGC and is this pipeline of mods actually going to cannibalize and impact the DLC sales in their titles? How do they build the tooling and the support function around the moderation of it all? Like, these are all considerations that give studios pause, and they're the sort of barriers to entry that is our purpose at Mod.io to knock down so that you can capture the value of modding as a business opportunity.
You talked about, obviously, this hesitation around them and their IP potentially being affected or impacted, or possibly what we can see in some mods, conversion mods implementing someone else's IP. So that brings up a question of moderation. In a world where companies are being sued over patent law, particularly for maybe sub-rideable characters now apparently can get sued for. Sorry, Red Dead Redemption 3, it's not going to happen. Where are we at? Like, it was mentioned in the blurb here that today's talk says this moderation topic is a ship and UGC is a potential iceberg. So I guess, am I Jack and you're Rose? Like, who's going to sink to the bottom of the ocean for this Titanic ship? But ultimately, who is the one who's in charge of moderating content that are mods and what users create for their game? And is there something that we should be clearly aware of before we dive into allowing the community to create content for a game for our game?
Look, I think the risk is overstated, but consideration should absolutely be given to it. But I mean, in 20 plus years of operating ModDB with 5 million monthly active users, and now we're working with 300 titles on Mod.io. There is DMCA and safe harbor and processes for managing IP. And a lot of these companies, especially in today's market, are realizing, like the whole transmedia application, that fan-inspired content is actually a good thing for their brand, as long as that fan-inspired content is following through with the ideals that they hold for their brand. And so what I mean by that is, I think that if you were to ask about studios and having their IP appearing in other games, 5-10 years ago, maybe there was slightly more negativity around that and concerns around that. These days, studios are actually approaching us and brands are approaching us and saying, how can we encourage creators to use our brand in a really interesting and unique way to help elevate and promote it? Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't have consideration about this, but where that consideration does apply, that's where DMCA and other processes come in, where if that rights holder sees that content and like, no, this does not adhere with our policies for fan content and what we approve, they can submit a DMCA, and there's this very simple process for us actioning and taking that content down and notifying the creator that it isn't permitted. And so we've never, in 20 plus years of operation, seen it escalate beyond that point. So I think consideration should absolutely be given to it, but fear of it shouldn't be a blocker to adoption.
Okay, so it shouldn't be a controlling factor of like, I'm not going to adopt UGC practices because of the fact that they could create the next Pokemon game inside my RPG. Yeah,
absolutely not. Though Nintendo is one company where the consideration might be given a little bit stronger than others. But no, like fan content, a lot of brands that are certainly receptive to it. And as long as you've got that really strong and robust DMCA process, then that's the key thing.
Is there an example that you can give of a surprising content, a surprising mod that was made using somebody else's IP that wasn't DMCA'd? That wasn't taken, well, you didn't get requests to take down?
I think of like the Mountain Blade modding scene is one that I've loved for a long time, and the mods that have been created within that ecosystem are incredible. This is a medieval sort of game about horseback riding, and yet you can play Star Wars in it. Disney, I think, is a really interesting company because their brands are absolutely loved, and they're very passionate about the protection of their brand. But equally, they do have like fan film and fanfic and just like fan content in games is allowed as long as that narrative and that environment and that respect and everything is applied to it. So some of these mods and total conversions that people have made in some of these more ambitious games that allow it have been quite transformative, because often they become a very popular way of experiencing a game that was once upon a time horseback riding, and now all of a sudden you're flying spaceships and you got swords with lasers in them. So yeah, it's very different.
So you don't have a specific example for that, but you are referencing like Disney content inside a Mountain Blade game, which is just incredible.
Yes, yeah, but there's countless examples of this.
Okay.
You could look at any title with any large sort of total conversion application, like even like the behemoths in Roblox today, like an early part of their content pipeline. It's now changed a lot as well. It's really interesting as these platforms evolve. But a lot of the early content on Roblox was very much anime inspired, and there was a lot of that sort of content. Now, it's interesting because now all the companies, as they mature, are creating their own IP, because that's where they realize if they're using someone else's, it might be a path to immediate popularity, but it's not a path to really commercial outcomes. And so as they professionalize and grow up, they realize, well, the best thing that I can do is actually build my own IP and own brand. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's kind of like this nice ecosystem where they sort of learn by being inspired by someone else's amazing world. They add and expand to that is good for that brand. But once they've gained that experience and knowledge, they then realize, well, the real opportunity for me is to make something of my own and to create my own IP and brand within this tooling that I now have familiarity with. And that's where a lot of creators ultimately graduate to. I've seen so many modders that started their career in that area, and then they use that knowledge to actually release a game that's vastly different from where they began.
Okay. That would go nicely to talking about the creators themselves, but before we move on, I wanted to talk about the flip side when you get a DMC request and moderation is required. Who does it fall on? When that request comes in, does it fall on the developer to implement that, to police that, or is it a case of it's a community-made mod, so it's part of whoever's running the community, if there is a head of the community? And furthermore, has there been any extreme reaction from communities about beloved content being taken down?
So at Mod.io, our policy is we are a service provider, and so we exist to help solve the challenges that studios have around user-generated content and to make it easy and approachable for them to apply it in their games. The standard, so say a DMCA, it is the creator of that content that is ultimately responsible for it. And then it's the studio, you have the freedom to decide what it is that you want in your game that's going to help grow and strengthen what you provide to the market. And then us as the sort of service provider and the platform. So it's kind of that order of responsibility. Having said that, DMCA is a little bit different because we are the ones that are in effect hosting that content. Yep. We are the ones that take responsibility for it in this instance. So the DMCA workflow is we will receive that and we will action it and take it down. So we do take responsibilities for DMCA within Mod.io when they come in, just as when you submit a video to YouTube, you don't see when YouTube receives a copyright strike or whatever. You just get notified that they have and they've taken action. The same happens within the Mod.io ecosystem. We receive the DMCA because we have to provide that process for it to occur, and we're the ones that take responsibility for it and action it from that point on behalf of the studio and the player, and then we notify the studio and the creator that this has occurred.
you want some water?
All good.
But then, yeah, my point on the community then, has there been any strong reactions from the community for a piece of content being taken down where they feel it's unfair that it's been taken down, for instance?
There's, at least within mod.io, there hasn't been any like that. There are instances where that has happened. Like right now, actually, there's a big controversy with Steam Workshop where people are abusing the DMCA process because they're just, I think I can't speak for Valve and their policy here and how it might differ from ours, but the easiest way to be in adherence with DMCA is when that claim comes in to just action it and almost like just to not even question it, just say, yep, this is a DMCA claim, I'm going to take that content down. That unfortunately has led to a situation now where people are using that to get content that maybe they don't like for whatever reason taken down, but the DMCA is not a valid reason for the takedown of that content. We apply more discretion than that at mod.io. Like it's this, we are there to allow that studio to facilitate the rules that they want to. So we will, it's an open dialogue and conversation when these come in. So we've never seen it really become a topic of conversation. Usually when content is taken down, it's pretty clear why it was. And so the questioning that, there might be a little bit of disappointment in the community, but the questioning why it occurred doesn't actually take place.
Okay, it's generally accepted that stuff can get taken down from the community of creators and users then? It's
rare though, like we have 5 million mods hosted on mod.io, and I'd say less than, it'd be in the less than 10,000 of 5 million that have actually had action. So we're talking a fraction of a percent.
Okay, and so then moderation within mod.io, it falls on you guys to apply that moderation when something comes in. What about the studios who develop their own tool set? I guess they then take responsibility for the content that's uploaded.
Well, there's multiple levels of moderation that occurs. There's moderation in terms of DMCA, which is a more reactive process. Then there's moderation or curation in terms of what do they actually want to make available for their players. So that's very different. So if we take the example of Baldur's Gate 3, they have a very clear content guidelines for what is allowed in their world, and they apply those rules when content gets submitted to decide what ultimately gets released. Now, that's not a DMCA process. That's them sort of controlling and managing what they believe is going to be best and most welcomed and enjoyed by their community, and making sure that it adheres with the guidelines, because that also is a game that is based on IP that is owned by the Wizards. Yeah. So they have to sort of apply the rules that the IP holder and they have to that content. So that's a moderation process that exists that isn't purely just like, say, DMCA, like a legal requirement.
Okay, cool. I am aware of time and would like to at least leave some time for questions. The creators then. You said they are a small percentage ultimately of the user base that uses the game. Why do you think people become creators? What is their key? Is there a key motivating factor? Has it been the same since time immemorial, like since the early 2000s, or has that changed over the last few years? What motivates people to become creators of mods?
We've polled creators a lot of times. We have a verified creator program behind the scenes at mod.io as well, where we're actively working with top modders to understand what motivates them. First and foremost, it's always a passion and love of the game. Like, that is always the driving force. So that's number one. If you've got a game which captures players' imagination and is a sort of game that there is the potential to expand upon the world that they've created, then most likely modding is going to be a feature that is going to be wanted by the community and applied in that title. So that's the first thing. Second thing is often it's just education and learning. Like, it's a really good grassroots way of gaining experience and taking steps towards moving into the industry. So many creators and ideas and studios have sort of taken seed as a mod in the early days, and then become something much more as it turns out that resonates with the playing group. So education and awareness is a big one. And then once that content is live, it's all about what you get addicted to and what I got addicted to in the early days when I first started creating communities and mods is I just love the player feedback. Like I love seeing people enjoy what I've made. Like that's really motivating. So at mod.io, for example, like we put heaps of effort into our created dashboards and systems that surface all those insights. We're working on a number of initiatives right now to build in really strong, notification and kind of positive loop feedback systems that once you have gone through the journey of creating a mod, like that's a phenomenal thing that should be celebrated, and creators should know that that's been celebrated and really enjoyed by players. So that's like kind of like once they've gone like over that initial I love the game and I want to change, I want to change some element about it to, all right, now I've changed something a little bit about it. All right, this is awesome. I love this feedback. And then they kind of get really immersed in the scene. And like we've got a couple of creators when we started that verified creator program. And I remember this conversation where they were all saying, oh yeah, I bought this game and I loved it. And I spent about 10 hours playing it. And you can see on my Steam profile, there's 10 hours of playing. Now I'm at 3,600 hours on Steam, like insane numbers. And like they're like 3,500 of those 90 hours actually was me modding the game, not playing it. Like where do you find that level of investment and sort of just love of the title and everything else? But I think the final point on this though is, and it sort of comes back to the topic of at least the punchline of today's conversation, and that is modding is certainly changing and the motivations are changing with it, and that commercialization is starting to occur now. So like I was at a summit recently and talking with a lot of Roblox developers. Yeah. They're actually modding because of the commercial opportunity. Yeah. It's no longer like there's a lot of passion that's occurring within that ecosystem, but there's also a lot of like creators now who are like, well, actually, this can be a career. And so like we believe that'd be an amazing thing to achieve for the industry if you can have this ecosystem where a game studio can find success by first and foremost releasing a really amazing game with that fantastic core gameplay loop. But in turn, you can build a really healthy ecosystem within that title where your players that want to professionalize can actually make a career out of it. And everything else. And so I think in the next sort of 5 years, that passion is actually going to also become profession as well. And modding's going to open that up as us and others help knock down the walls and consumer acceptance and things rise.
Kind of sounds like the early days of video games. Sitting in my garage, not that I have a garage, I don't even have a car, but sitting in the garage and programming on your first computer that you've managed to just scrape together and making Pong or something. Yeah,
the beauty of modding as well is when you offer it, like if you wanted to make like a really high fidelity AAA or AA or even an indie title, the investment and the time is enormous to do that. If you can mod someone else's title, like you're skipping from like the first 9 steps and you're getting straight to level 10. So if that studio can then attach community features and multiplayer and cross-platform and even potentially monetization, like they're incredibly hard things to solve, even in today's gaming landscape with access to amazing technology like Unity and Unreal. And so I think that's where modding is really fantastic because those amateur creators can very quickly get to really high fidelity levels by building on top of a foundation that a studio has established for them. And then in turn, that's fantastic for the studio because now you've got this really creative and in effect, limitless content pipeline that you can use as player engagement to get your audience to return and to build a dialogue with your comms team and promotion and everything else. Like the studios that do it really well, like they treat modding almost as like a community-run live service feature, and they celebrate the amazing things that are happening with that community because the creators love it, and then in turn that causes the players to talk and return more.
Well, that goes quite nicely on to what's motivating the players to actually try mods. You've got your base game here, you've got what the developers intended as the story. Maybe they've put in the similar amount of hours to playing just the base game or base game plus DLC or whatever. Then why should I as a player pick up mods? Why should I start installing these things to what could corrupt my save?
I think I think there's really two motivating forces for players. One, it's personalization. So that's more mods where it's just like particularly in single player titles, when I start playing Skyrim, I download 100 mods because I want to change everything from the skybox, the look and feel of the dinosaurs, the dragons, the NPCs, and everything else in the world. Like I want to change and make it play the way that I want to play, so it feels different and innovative and interesting. So the first one is that, and then the second one is gameplay. I want to experience new levels, new challenges, new storylines, and everything else. So they're the two things, because often when you finish a game that you love, you want more from it. And unlike, that's one of the amazing things about being in the games industry, we have the ability to give the player more. Once a movie ends, you can't really be like, well, here's something else. And so that's really when I am playing mods, it's like, am I here to personalize it and to make, deck out my character or a UI and make this game look amazing in the way I want to play it? Or is it because I actually want to experience more content and diversity in the gameplay, and I want to look for those gameplay modifications?
Have you seen this motivation for more content from the players and then use mods instead of, for instance, purchase DLC, have an impact on the actual official content provided by the developer?
We've actually researched this, and the answer is no. We just did a report with Game Discover Co. So that's an industry body, great newsletter. I highly recommend you subscribe it. Simon Carlos and his team analyzes sales trends on Steam and everything else. And so we asked Simon, can you try to quantify what impact does modding have on game sales and DLC and other things? Because all of a sudden you've got this crazy content pipeline from your community. Does that mean that your commercial content pipeline is precisely now in conflict with one another?
Yeah.
And the net of that actually was kind of surprising. Well, maybe not surprising, but when you have mods in your title, you have, I can't remember the exact number, but it's over 100%. It's 109% greater sell-through of your DLC content. So even though players have access to all this modded content, they're actually buying more DLC. And the reason for that is simple. When you have mods, you also have a more engaged player base. So you that same research concluded that games with mods in them over a 5-year period have more than twice the number of players at the end of that journey than games that don't. And so if you've got twice as many players, naturally there's going to be twice as many players buying that DLC. And the really strong studios actually use mods to their advantage. So when they've got a new DLC coming out, maybe it introduces a new biome or a new gameplay mechanic to the title, they'll simultaneously work with their mod creators to make interesting levels and tracks and gameplay experiences that leverage that new content. So then you've got this symbiotic relationship where players are like, oh my God, there's this amazing mod coming out that I really want to play. I also need to own the DLC because they're connected. So you can really use one to amplify the other. And again, in this same report that we published, we talked to SnowRunner, because it's a studio that's been using mod.io for 4 years now. And so we got a lot of data there. And they have 16 seasons of content now. There's 100 studio released trucks in the game, but there's 1,000 creator-made trucks, so they're in conflict because one you got to buy and one's free. And they said that consumers that are downloading the modded trucks are 2.4 times more likely to also buy the DLC. They're your really passionate, engaged players. So instead of, between those season passes, instead of having your players slowly dwindle and then the season pass comes along and you try to pick up a few more and then they dwindle, but you're ultimately, your sales curve is ultimately shark fitting down. When you've got modding, it fills in the gaps between those season passes. So now all of a sudden you've got players that are playing all of the mods and engaging with the mods, and so you've got a much larger base to sell that season pass through to. That creates a much more healthy ecosystem, particularly when those creators are then using the DLC and the new items that are coming to make interesting experiences themselves.
Okay, so just extending the interest in the game around a new DLC launch is more mods, and I can now play more for longer, and it kind of covers a bit of the development time for the next DLC, for instance. So you're not waiting, maybe moving on to your next new game. You're still playing the same game.
Yeah, players are fickle these days. Yeah. They've got a lot of options on where they apply
their time. We're
still
playing Skyrim.
Yeah.
What about then the flip side of motivation being the pain points, the tensions that players and creators encounter? Are these a continuing, reoccurring pain point across the last 20 years, or is there like new ones today that weren't around in 2004 when ModDB launched?
Well, the pain points that exist today are very different from the pain points that existed back then, because the pain point back then was the friction of adoption, and you had to go to a website. That meant that 5 to 20% of your player base, maybe max, would have enough confidence to be able to even play with mods because of the technical barriers to do it.
Mine was my internet speed. It was awful.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas now with digital distribution, like the whole reason why Mod.io exists is to try to officialize your modding community and to make it work cross-platform and to make it accessible through the in-game menu. So all your players have to do to experience modding is open up their game and then go to the mod menu and say, I really want to play this content, this content, this content, this content, and then it all just magically happens. And as I said, that opens up a ton of potential. So the friction and the pain points and things, I think a lot of those have now been solved, and we're continuing to try to do that. The challenge with modding, though, is still mods. Like if you try to mod the same character, for example, those two mods are now in conflict with one another, and surfacing those conflicts up to the player to ensure that a stable gameplay experience and one that fits within the vision of the world. So you're not having weird things that ruin the immersion. There's still challenges that are hard to solve, because building the systems around load order and conflict management and resolution and things can be tougher, particularly when that's not considered in the game development process. Like a lot of games that we work with, and one of the beautiful things about modding is it can be a post-release feature. So a lot of games that we're talking with, like we've got this really successful title, we haven't done modding, or we've got this unofficial mod community. We now want to officialize it, we want to make it accessible, we want to make it work cross-platform. And when we dig a little bit deeper, we're like, all right, there's a bunch of technical decisions that in the way that people are modding your title right now, that are not going to work with what you want to do moving forward. So you have to revisit those technical decisions and address them in order to get that better compatibility and accessibility of content through an in-game menu.
So ideally, you consider mods or supporting user-generated content very early on in your development stage, so that you can create your game in a way where it allows this sort of accessibility and not returning to do a technical issue that could come up.
Well, I mean, we certainly we like working with studios now that want to do it early, but almost every game that we worked with is doing it retrospectively. I mean, we're in the process of working with CD Projekt Red right now for The Witcher 3, and they're adding modding as a 10-year anniversary feature. That game's always had this incredible modding community, and so they're officializing it and making it available cross-platform as part of like a 10-year anniversary update. So you don't have to think about it really early in your journey, but naturally, as with any decision, the earlier that you think about it in your journey, then the less sort of pain you're going to have when you actually do want to invest into it, because you've already solved the common challenges. And like we've got a playbook for studios. Like if you're an Unreal Engine title and you're talking to us, or Unity title, we'll say, here are the best practice recommendations. When you're doing this, consider this. If you're not thinking with that sort of mindset, and you're not kind of dog-fooding your own tools and creating systems that eventually will be in the hands of your creators, it's a bigger bit of work to then make it function in that way than had you done it from day one.
Yeah. We are getting close to Q&A time. So the future of user-generated content in video games, what's the next 3 to 5 years look like from your viewpoint with Mod.io and ModDB?
I think the biggest shift that's going to happen is really, again, the topic of this conversation. I think that it's already very mainstream, but it's still not very mainstream in that at least on console and mobile, like UGC only in the last few years has become a feature that those players have had access to. There's still a lot of genres of games, your MMOs, your MOBAs, your free-to-play titles, a lot of titles that are made in Eastern markets that don't have modding. So over the next 3 to 5 years, I think what we're going to see is very much more widespread adoption of it. Like there was a point in time only 2 years ago that EA and Take-Two would never talk about modding and anything else. Now, in every quarterly investor update, they're talking about how they're thinking about enabling creation within their ecosystems. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with the next Grand Theft Auto game, because Rockstar acquired 5M, who makes a modding framework. So they acquire, like, are they going to apply that in the next installment in Grand Theft Auto? And that's a massive change from probably their vision and perception of that modding community. And I think that's because that community made role play and everything else, and that's now more streamed than the actual, the base game itself. So my belief is that as the entire ecosystem is going to put a lot more emphasis and priority on the moddability of their titles, and just as the games industry has evolved over the journey where once upon a time premium was the only business model, and then in free-to-play like subscriptions, like WoW subscriptions came along and became a new business model. Then free-to-play came along, and then loot boxes came along, and then gacha mechanics came along. And whilst each of those business models is not for every game, I think that modding and UGC and creator economies and all of these sorts of things is actually going to become one of the really strong business models that studios can pursue, where they let their players become creators and in turn professionalize that, and consumer acceptance and understanding that, hey, this actually can be it's not just a really powerful goodwill generator and everything for my title, but it actually can become, a business model that I can strive for and build towards. Like that's where I think there's going to be some pretty material changes. But just with those business models, like free to play, it's not for every game. There's still got to be a high percentage of titles where it's like, we just want the moddability of our title purely because we know it's great for the player, we know that they love it, and we want to make it accessible for all of our audience on all systems that they run. Like anything, there'll be a big shift, but some studios will pick and choose what they do and how they tackle it.
Great. I obviously have a load more questions, but there is a bit of an audience today, so I'll pass it over to audience Q&A first. Has anyone got a question for Scott? Hand over there, hand here.
Hi. From the perspective of a studio that potentially wants to embrace modding, can you share some thoughts on the potential considerations you might have in terms of how much of your game you should open up to modding? One end of the spectrum, obviously, you've got completely closed source games where there's no modding. The other extreme, you might have, complete open source code where literally give, your source binaries, to the public where, anything can be changed. Are there any sort of considerations in terms of, should you start with, basic assets or, core systems, whether there's maybe a kind of, pipeline in terms of, possibly rolling out the ability to mod certain components of a game over an extended period, or have you got any thoughts on that kind of thought process there?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really, without knowing anything about your game, first of all, I'd always look at the genre and what's succeeding for titles within that genre, and what are players modding and what mods are getting, attracting the most interest from those communities. So that's always the starting point, because there should be a lot of other knowledge and success that you can look at. But you can absolutely take baby steps with mods. So you can start on content that's pretty simplistic and easy to mod, and then expand it over time. So again, coming back to the Baldur's Gate 3 example, like when they first started with it, mods started really simple. It was like dice and character modifications and quality of life and UI improvements. And now they've been continuing to expand the tooling and what's possible, because they're kind of in effect they want the community to continue the legacy of the game into the foreseeable future and to continue expanding on the foundation that they've built. So they started small and then are getting bigger and bigger and more ambitious with those plans, and that's working really well for them. I would say, generally speaking, like I love this topic because a lot of studios that we talk to are like, it's about democratization of creation, and it's about making creation easier, and we've got to have these really easy drag to drop systems. And I always say to them, that's actually not true at all. Like, don't underestimate the ability of your creators and the talent that they have. Dynamic range is really important. The strongest games with really long modding legacies have historically had really powerful and very open and very large sort of dynamic range of creation. So the more that you can strive towards that, then I think ultimately the bigger the potential impact that modding can have in your title. But you can absolutely start small and just pick out the areas that are easy for creators, that will be played by players, and then you can see how that goes and then start to expand on it.
Thank you.
We need to fill in the walk here. We need some music.
You can sing if you want.
Thank you. When it comes to copyright, in the sense of copyright in between mods, how exactly is that handled? Because I imagine that would get quite messy, particularly if mods are predicated on other IP.
Are you talking about the situation where the game is based on an IP or where the mod is based on the IP?
So I guess what I more mean, and I've kind of seen this in communities before, plagiarism between mods, but the mod is based on, you know, an IP that the person doesn't own, but I guess to an extent there is original work that's happening there. How exactly do you think that kind of thing should be handled?
Yeah, so it's kind of weird because when a mod is based on like a IP, the process for its management is very simple, and that is, we sort of covered it earlier in the conversation, DMCA. If the rights holder doesn't approve that kind of fan content, they'll send a DMCA and it'll get taken down. It's a very straightforward, clean-cut, very well-established system that's used by YouTube and all the other biggest ones. What you're alluding to there is actually much more complex and actually much more common, and that is where creators are appropriating other content from the community. So one thing that we've got within mod.io that makes this very easy to police, and we recommend studios enable it, is you can actually allow creators to specify what is allowed when they submit their content. So there's a series of checkboxes where they can say, you can re-release this content with credits, you can re-release it with no attribution, you can't copy it. There's 8 options that they can choose from. And then when you're moderating these decisions, it becomes very clear cut then, because you can see, all right, this creator has said this, 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 and this. You've clearly haven't followed this. Therefore, we are going to take action appropriately as a result of that. In lieu of that, then yeah, it often becomes a he says, she says sort of situation, which can be a little bit complex, and you have to hear 2 sides of the story.
Any other questions? Oh, a couple more hands.
Modding has always been about shared creativity, players and studios succeeding together, but we still see a gap between how much value creators bring and how much support or sustainability they receive. From your perspective, what needs to change for the next wave of modding to truly deliver mutual success for creators, studios, and platforms alike?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I agree. The value that I've seen modders create for games is absolutely enormous and can't be understated. And it pains me when it lives on the fringes. Really, that's up to the studio. I know we worked with Techland for Dying Light, and what they discovered was, and coming back to what motivates creators, is they discovered that the most important thing that they can do is actually run studio tours and workshops where they flew in some of their most influential and top creators and introduced them to the developers and showed them behind the scenes look at what the studio is working on. And I thought that was just amazing, because that was more motivational than anything else that they could possibly do. And I'd love to see more of that. I think also just respecting creators through communicating. Like, you don't have to fly them in. You can do much more simple things like share with creators, like create a verified creator program and share with them, this update's coming to the game in a month's time. You can potentially have early access to our SDK and tooling. We'd love to see you start to create content for them. So almost treat them as an extension of your team and with the same degree of respect that you would treat your team. That will pay a ton of dividends because creators will really respect you for that, and they'll be really excited by that because the reason why they're modding in the first place is for a love of what you're doing. And so the more that they can feel involved and connected to that process, then the greater outcome there will be.
Okay, that's time. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Josh. It's been a pleasure.